to the Sakshi Education webinar series. The series of webinars aim and objective is to prepare the civil aspirants to ready and achieve their goals. Today's webinar topic is Economic History of India 1857 to 1947. Today our speakers are Dr. Kotireddy sir from ICFI, HOD and the Dean of ICFI School of Social Sciences, and Dr. Subhash Bharman. Sir will join later for the second technical session to deliver his talk.
The topic for my presentation is the economic impact of British Raj. The lecture is divided into 4 parts. In addition to the introduction, and we will have some idea on the status of the agriculture sector, industrial sector, and international trade during the British Raj. As part of the introduction, India has witnessed significant changes in its economic structure and development between 1857 and 1947. The economic impact of British Raj included those related to land ownership, industrialization, trade and taxation greatly influenced the Indian economy. The economic policies followed by the British led to rapid transformation of Indian economy into a colonial economy whose nature and structure were determined by the needs of the British economy. Land revenue experiments such as Lord Cornwallis permanent settlement system, Mahalwari system, and Rautwari system, and one-way free trade marginalized the Indian farmers and artisans. The British Raj transformed India into a supplier of raw material and a market for British goods. During British period, the number of landless laborers increased due to commercialization of agriculture. The Indian handloom weaving industry was hit by the industrialization in England, and eventually this industry collapsed in India. Despite some modernization efforts, the overall legacy of economic impact of British rule was one of economic exploitation and stagnation, leaving a lasting imprint on India's economy. The cultivators lacked means and incentives for agriculture investments, thereby the agriculture sector was affected adversely. According to Dadabhai Nauroji, the British rule resulted in the continuous and systematic outflow of wealth from India to Britain without any reciprocal benefit. Nauroji also argued that the drain of wealth from India to Britain was one of the main reasons India was so poor and underdeveloped. The exploitative taxation policies. The British Raj has adopted exploitative taxation policies. Such kind of policies destroyed India's indigenous industries, and oppressive land revenue systems led to widespread poverty. The introduction of railways facilitated rising imported commodities, further draining India's wealth. The high tax burden in India was disproportionately large relative to the country's wealth. The real wages of both skilled and unskilled workers in 1928 were roughly 50% of what they were in 1807. The decline in real wages of unskilled workers was much more, as they were not even 40% of the real wages in 1807. Though there was some improvement in the real wage rate of workers, but it was not enough to neutralize the decline in the earlier period. During the British Raj, many cities declined due to deindustrialization, and artisans moved to villages and engaged in agriculture. As a result, the pressure on land raised and it led to overburdened agriculture due to the economic impact of British rule in villages. And government has not allocated that much of resources for agriculture development, technological development, or mass communication. In 1820, India's GDP was 16% of the global GDP. By 1870, it had fallen to 12% and then to 4% by 1947. So from this, just we will come to know, India's share in the world GDP has come down drastically since 1820. By 1947, the India's share in world GDP stood at only 4%. The per capita income growth from 1850 to 1900 is estimated between 0.75% and 1.25% annually. From 1850 to 1947, India's per capita income had grown by 16%. India's share in global industrial output also declined from 25% in 1750 to 2% by 1990. In the last 50 years of colonial rule, India has witnessed some progress. This is likely the result of several kinds of public investments in railways, education, and irrigation, etc. According to a statistical abstract relating to British India, the number of educational institutions expanded sevenfold from 15,136 in 1862-63 to 107,415 in 1899-1900. During the same period, the length of railways increased tenfold from 2,234 miles to 23,512 miles. Under the permanent settlement system in Bengal, the land revenue to be paid by the Jamindars was fixed. In turn, Jamindars collected taxes from the peasants. Actually, Jamindars have collected huge amount in the form of tax from the peasants. Thereby, the agriculture incomes of the actual farmers have been declined. Under the Rautwari system, peasants are directly responsible for paying taxes to the government. Under Mahalwari system, village community was collectively responsible for tax payment. However, the tax rates were high, leading to widespread discontent among the farming community. The British colonial administration also imposed several commercial taxes, including customs duty and excise duty. These taxes were often designed to benefit the British interest at the expense of Indian industries. The Britishers exploited Indian resources through these taxation policies, leading to what is often referred to as the drain of wealth. So from this we can say most of the wealth was drained from India to England by adopting the defective taxation policies by the Britishers. Now, as part of my presentation, just I would like to focus on the status of agriculture during the British Raj. The colonial policies in India from the mid-18th century to 1947 led to commercialization of agriculture during the British rule. Farmers started growing crops for profits instead of sustenance needs. So farmers focused more on growing the commercial crops. The Britishers encouraged the Indian farmers to grow cash crops like cotton, jute, wheat, indigo, and opium, which were high demand in Britain. The traditional crops were neglected, forcing farmers to grow more commercial crops. The land revenue system, Jamindari system, spread of market system, and Swadeshi movement contributed to the commercialization of agriculture. The agricultural performance during 1918 and 1939 was dismal. From 1891 to 1946, the annual growth rate of all crop output was 0.4%, and the food grain output was practically stagnant. There were significant regional and intercrop differences. However, non-food crops doing better than food crops. Among food crops, by far, the most important source of stagnation was rice. Bengal had below average growth rates in both food and non-food crop output, whereas Punjab and Madras were the least stagnant regions. Between 1918 and 1939, population growth accelerated while food output decelerated, leading to decline in the availability of food per hectare. So it clearly reflects the per capita availability of food grains was a decline during the British rule in between 1918 and 1939. The crisis was most acute in Bengal, where food output declined at an average annual rate of 0.7% from 1921 to 1946, when the population grew at an average annual rate of 1%. The British policies overburdened the agriculture sector, leading to poverty during the British Raj. The revenue rates under Raitwari system were 50% for dry land and 60% for irrigated lands, which resulted in excessive taxes that impoverished the farming community. As far as the Indian economy is concerned, before Britishers entering into the country, India was a self-sufficient economy. But the economy was hampered during the British rule. As more and more people dependent on agriculture, the dependency on monsoons increased, leading to widespread poverty, droughts, and famines. In the second half of the 19th century, the country has witnessed a series of famines. The first of these occurred in western Uttar Pradesh in 1860-61. It cost over 2 lakh lives. So 2 lakh people died due to this famine in western Uttar Pradesh. In 1865-66, a famine occurred in Orissa, Bengal, and Madras, in which nearly 20 lakh lives were lost. In 1868-70, in between 1868 and 70, 40 lakh persons died in western Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, and Bombay. In 1876-78, the worst famine in Indian history occurred in Madras, Mysore, Hyderabad, Maharashtra, and western Uttar Pradesh. In 1896-97, drought led to a countrywide famine which affected 9.5 crore lives and caused the death of over 45 lakhs. The famine of 1899-1900 quickly followed and caused the death of nearly 25 lakh persons. Another famine in Bengal in 1943 led to the loss of 3 million people. In addition to various plague and flu spread during British rule, so due to this kind of communicable diseases, 15 million people lost lives in 1918. So in 1918, Spanish flu spread across the world, and the soldiers returning from the World War led to its spread in India. It took more than 50 lakh lives. Now, as far as the uh, lecture is concerned, now I would like to focus on the industrial sector during the British Raj. Similar to the agriculture sector in India, the industrial sector also did not see that much of growth and development. Britishers followed the process of deindustrialization of Indian industries to make way for British industries to flourish. Textiles faced 80% tariff and lost competitiveness in the European market. Britishers stopped the practice of using handicraft exports by placing more tariff on handicrafts. Handicrafts faced stiff competition from machine-made products from England. Up to the First World War, India experienced the classic period of imperialism of free trade and the British government's unsympathetic hostile policy against the Indian industry. In addition to shortage of capital, management experience, and technical expertise, as well as the absence of growing indigenous market, general poverty. So all these things caused slow expansion of Indian industries. Even then, between 1850 and 1914, the foundations of modern industries were laid in India. Due to stiff foreign competition, Indian industries in the mid-1920s demanded protection in unwavering manner. To this end, the Fiscal Commission was appointed in 1921 that ushered in a policy of discriminating protection. During the interwar period, that is between 1919 and 1938, output of cotton piece goods, steel ingots, paper increased. Many other industries also progressed, even in terms of employment and the number of factories. But as far as the diversification was concerned, it was indeed slow, and the state of transformation of the Indian economy was only marginal. The Second World War, however, opened a new phase in India's industrial history. As the charter of the World War II was different from that of the first, the latter created a far urgent and intense demand for rapid growth of the India's basic and key industries. The industrial output of large-scale industries expanded significantly, but also a more widening of industrial diversification became possible during the wartime years. During 1938-39 to 1945-46, the general index of output of all large-scale manufacturing activity at 1938-39 prices rose from 100 to 161, and that of factory employment increased from 100 to 159. British ships were given monopoly. Indian ships faced heavy duties, and the laws designed by the Britishers restricted the Indian-built ships also. The restrictions were on Indian steel imports, forcing higher standard production for the British use. As far as the progress of international trade during the British Raj is concerned, India's foreign trade was manipulated to benefit the Britishers. Britishers maintained monopoly over exports and imports of India. The British implemented restrictive policies on commodity production, trade, and tariff. As a result of restrictions on commodity production, more tariffs, much of the foreign trade of India with the rest of the world was affected adversely. Nearly half of the foreign trade was exclusively reserved for Britain. Although some foreign trade was permitted with a few countries such as China, Ceylon, and Persia, the colonial authorities closely monitored these transactions. Despite such transactions, there was a considerable export surplus during the British Raj. However, the export surplus came at the expense of low production of essential goods such as clothing, food grain, and kerosene. Mainly, the export surplus came from these kind of essential goods, as because of the expense is very low in terms of producing these products. These resources was disproportionately diverted towards producing items for export, resulting in severe shortage of domestic goods. The Britishers used the export surplus to fight wars, pay for an office in Britain, and import invisible items. So far, we had a discussion on the status of agriculture sector, status of industrial sector, status of international trade, and the status of the tax system during the British. So, in conclusion, I would like to highlight there was hardly any economic development under the British rule. The constant per capita income over a long period, increasing dependence on agriculture, inadequate industrialization, the wealth drain from India to England, decline of handicrafts, and British monopoly over exports and imports of India are the clear proofs of economic underdevelopment under the British rule. So, with this, I have completed my presentation. I thank the Sakshi Media Group for giving me this opportunity to participate in the webinar.